For the top of the hour, 6 more people have been charged in connection with massive fraud schemes in Minnesota. The Justice Department accusing these suspects of making various housing and medical claims reaching upwards of $6 million. Here's the prosecutor.
Minnesotans and taxpayers deserve to know the truth of the fraud. The fraud is not small. It isn't isolated. The magnitude cannot be overstated. What we see in Minnesota is not a handful of bad actors committing crimes. It's a staggering industrial-scale fraud.
All right, folks, what you just watched should make every American furious. And if it doesn't, you're not paying attention. This isn't some small paperwork mistake. This isn't a few bad apples. This is industrial-scale fraud, and it happened right under the nose of Democrat leadership in Minnesota. 6 more people charged, millions more stolen. And the deeper investigators dig, the uglier the story gets.
It's so important for him to say that. People are trying to minimize it. It should not be minimized. Here to discuss it, Fox & Friends Weekend co-hosts Charlie Hurd and Griff Jenkins. Guys, this is unbelievable. You have the Feeding the Future program, which is feeding people that are desperate. They were bilking that, sending it back to Somalia. Autism, taking kids, putting them into programs they don't need for instruction that they don't qualify for, but they took the money, gave it to the parents, and they sent it back to Somalia in many cases. Griff, what's your reaction to this?
Well, what's fascinating, Brian, is that late last night, James Comer, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, said that the Governor Walz and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison's response to a December letter to get more information on this was, quote, anemic. In his words, they're not cooperating, and they're threatening now to drag Governor Walz and AG Ellison before the House Oversight Committee to find out. Why? Because we are learning, as you just pointed out, that the fraud runs deeper than previously known, and there are still questions about whether they subpoena bank records to find out if any of this fraud money was going back to terror groups in Somalia and elsewhere.
I also saw this report, Charlie, that people, Somalis, were traveling with suitcases full of cash through the TSA, which evidently you're allowed to do, but they also take pictures of it and record it, and that was going back to Somalia. As you respond to this, why don't we roll in some of the names and the money they're accused of bilking?
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. Initially we were told that it was going to be $1 billion, but now it looks like more like $10 billion. And as the prosecutor pointed out, it is industrial scale. And what makes it, I think, even more potentially politically toxic is the fact that we're talking about fraud tourism, basically, where you had people coming to this country with the promise of being able to defraud American taxpayers. And we've already seen there are some connections between some of the people that have been caught up in this and political leaders in Minnesota. I think that when you're talking about $10 billion, you're probably going to find a whole lot more connections like that, and it's going to become a whole lot more toxic.
Right.
But the fact that you can sort of meld this level of fraud also with a wide open border that allowed a lot of these people to come in unchecked, unvetted, and with motives that we don't even care to find out about, you're looking at a story that's not going away, and I think it's going to get a whole lot worse for Tim Walz and others in Minnesota.
Exactly, because they looked the other way, and when people looked into it, they were called racist for looking into Somalis who were stealing our money.
Fox and Friends Weekend laid it out clearly. This fraud wasn't accidental. It was systematic. We're talking about welfare programs, housing assistance, medical claims, and pandemic relief that were meant to help real Americans in need. Families struggling, seniors, disabled citizens. Instead, those programs were turned into an ATM for fraudsters. And what really jumps out to me is how federal prosecutors describe this. Backhand index pointing right. Staggering industrial-scale fraud. That's prosecutor language for, this couldn't have happened without serious failures or willful blindness at the top. Let's talk about Feeding the Future. This program was supposed to help feed kids during COVID lockdowns. Instead, according to investigators, it became a fraud pipeline. People who didn't qualify. Fake instruction programs. Children listed who were never served. Medical claims that never happened. And yet the checks kept going out. Why? Because oversight was weak, Accountability was non-existent. And Democrat officials didn't want to ask inconvenient questions. Now here's where the story goes from outrageous to downright dangerous. Investigators say large sums of money were sent overseas, including to Somalia. Let me be very clear here. This is not about ordinary immigrants who follow the law and work hard. This is about criminal networks exploiting American generosity. Suitcases of cash, wires overseas, no serious tracking. And now lawmakers are asking the obvious question. Backhand index pointing right, did any of this money end up funding terror groups? Because if you don't care where billions of dollars go, you're not governing. You're gambling with national security. House Oversight Chairman James Comer says Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison have been anemic and uncooperative. That's Washington speak for. They're stonewalling. If you have nothing to hide, you cooperate. If you care about taxpayers, you open the books. If you're innocent, you don't fear subpoenas. So why the resistance? Why does Congress have to threaten subpoenas just to get basic answers? And folks, this isn't just Minnesota. This is what happens when borders aren't enforced. Bureaucrats aren't questioned. Oversight is labeled racist or mean. Accountability disappears. The left calls this compassion. I call it recklessness. When government stops protecting taxpayers, criminals rush in to fill the vacuum. One of the most shocking phrases in this whole discussion was fraud tourism. People allegedly come into the U.S. not to work, not to build, not to contribute, but to exploit broken systems. That's not opportunity. That's theft. And every dollar stolen is a dollar not helping an American family. Here's my take, and I won't sugarcoat it. If you manage billions of taxpayer dollars and fail to stop fraud on this scale, you should be investigated. If you ignore red flags for political reasons, you should be held accountable. If you sent money overseas without proper safeguards, you should answer under oath. This isn't left versus right. This is law-abiding Americans versus a corrupt, careless system. Call to action. So here's what needs to happen next. Heavy checkmark full subpoenas. Heavy checkmark bank records opened. Heavy checkmark every dollar traced. Heavy checkmark every official questioned. Heavy checkmark criminals prosecuted to the fullest extent. No excuses. No political cover. No moving on. Because America cannot survive if honesty is optional and accountability is selective. We can be generous and responsible. We can help the needy and protect taxpayers. But only if leaders stop playing politics and start doing their jobs. If you agree, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Because the media won't talk about this unless we force them to. God bless. Stay informed and stay patriotic, United States.